Hi, everyone, and welcome to another Being Healthy live stream. Today, we're going to be looking at something which really is close to my heart. How do we give birth to life? And is it only important how we give birth, or is the preparation for it equally important as well? And so, with us, I'm really glad to have Corina Fitch with us today. And I was going to bring her right away. Sabina is here with us. Hi, Sabina. So we're going to go to Corina. Corina, how did you even think about midwifery and the fact that women need support during pregnancy and not medical support? And what allowed you to even come to this decision that you could do this?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me. And I was born on a commune in Tennessee that was the largest intentional community in the United States, and was founded by a group of San Francisco hippies. And one of the, like, kind of at the heart of the community was the fact that the women gave birth at home in community, and they gave birth with midwives. And so I grew up just thinking that this was the normal way that women gave birth. I didn't really learn about hospital birth until much later in my life. And my mother used to attend births as an assistant to the midwives, and she would come home and share with me the birth stories. So by the time I was about 12 years old, I knew that I wanted to become a midwife.
But what did you
And
do to do so? This stage is yours. Tell the whole story.
so I started off by getting trained as a doula, which is somebody who provides physical and emotional support for the laboring person. That could be a birth doula or a postpartum doula. I became a birth doula, and I ended up attending my very first birth on my 21st birthday. And I had been waiting for months to go to my first birth, and so the fact that it happened to fall on that day felt very auspicious to me. It felt like I was on the right path, and at a time when most people are out getting legally drunk, I was witnessing the miracle of life, and I was hooked. And so I ended up coming back to this community. It's called The Farm in Tennessee, and that summer to apprentice with the midwives. And the farm midwives are known globally because of a book that came out that was published in the 1970s, I guess, or 1980, that called Spiritual Midwifery. And the book is like, half of the book is birth stories. It's just like story after story after story, all of the births uniquely their own, and yet these there's universal aspects to them. And so the half the book was birth stories, and the other half was kind of like practical information as far as like how to take care of yourself when you're pregnant, how to prepare for the birth, and how to take care of yourself postpartum. And that book has sold over 500,000 copies, has been translated into 6 or 7 languages, and is known throughout the globe. And so I was coming back to train with these midwives and attended my first home birth, which was actually a little complicated, and the baby needed some help breathing, and yet still I wasn't deterred. And so I had to make a decision at that point. I was living in California, and I had to make a decision about where I was going to go to school. And I ultimately decided to move to Miami, where my parents were living, and attend a school in Miami, which was a really great experience because it also offered me the opportunity to attend births abroad. I went to Jamaica. The first babies that I caught were in Jamaica, and then Haiti. And then after I got licensed, I took students to Honduras to attend births there in a low-risk hospital, and it was like a teaching experience for them. So yeah, again, then I graduated and got my midwifery license in 1999, and opened up my own home birth practice. And at the same time was working as a nurse. I went ahead and got my nursing degree as well. And I worked in the neonatal intensive care unit with sick and premature newborns. So when I was in nursing school, because I was already a midwife, they were like, oh, you probably want to do labor and delivery. So they stuck me in labor and delivery for like my 2-week intensive rotation. And it just confirmed for me that I could never work labor and delivery, because the birth in the hospital setting is very, very different from birth in the community setting. And it felt very misaligned with my philosophy of birth, with how I wanted women to be treated, and all of those things. So, but I felt like the NICU was kind of like a nice complement to my midwifery skills and knowledge and practice to, just have more expertise with the babies. So yeah, that's kind of how I became a midwife.
So what you just said, there was a difference between the delivery and the labor in the hospital, in the medical setting, and the community setting. Can you tell us what you saw was the difference?
Yeah. Well, so first, it's a much more institutionalized experience, right? You're coming to an institution which has its own set of guidelines and protocols, and so you do, even though technically you do have the right to refuse any kind of treatment that is being offered or suggested to you, it can feel very coercive, and the lived experience often is that people don't get informed consent in the hospital setting, and so they're kind of like thrown into this system where everyone gets treated the same way, kind of. And so they have to take off their own clothes and put on a hospital gown. So you're like taking away a little bit of the woman's identity, and making it more of this institutional experience. And that might sound like really dramatic, but it actually does have impact. And then their blood is drawn, they get an IV, they get hooked up to a monitor. So now they're strapped down. They have two different monitors on their belly. One is to measure the strength of the uterine contractions, and the other one is to monitor the baby's heartbeat. And then very often the labor gets augmented or sped up with Pitocin, which is a synthetic form of the hormone oxytocin, which makes the uterus contract in labor. And then that can, you may have heard of this idea of a cascade of interventions. So the Pitocin can lead to either the mother not being able to cope with the pain, because now it's not a normal, natural pattern. It's intensified. Pitocin contractions are stronger. They're fiercer. They're can often get back to back. So there's not much of a breathing room in between. So either she's overwhelmed, and now even though maybe she was planning to birth without medication, she desires an epidural, or the baby gets stressed from the Pitocin, which is one of the risks of Pitocin. And then that leads to like, well, hey, they might try some different things. And if those don't resolve it, then that leads to a C-section. And then the epidural sometimes can lead to a very smooth vaginal birth, and other times it can stall things out or make the mother's blood pressure come down so much that it affects the baby, and then they're taken for a C-section. So this is just a common experience in the hospital setting. In the community setting, the mother is either in her own home, which I think is the best, because assuming she has good living conditions, but to be in your own environment on your own turf puts you in a different psychological state than when you step out of your own environment and into somebody else's turf. And so the physiological birth, which just means like an undisturbed birth, a birth that just spontaneously unfolds and progresses to the birth of the baby, works best in an environment where the woman feels safe, where she feels a sense of privacy, and familiarity, and where she feels like she can be uninhibited. So she can be naked if she wants, she can make noises, she can get in all kinds of positions. It's a very primal experience, and it's a very holistic experience. So in the home setting, we're able to create the space for that more holistic experience where you are opening emotionally, you're opening physically in a way that you've never opened before. Well, unless it's, not your first, but either way, it's a big opening. You're opening spiritually, you're maybe having to reach states of surrender, and you're dealing with incredible sensations. And so being able to move your body freely, being able to have the lights dim and to have the music that you want on, to have essential oils going. All of these things are just more easily facilitated in the community space, and can lead to really incredible ecstatic states of being, and really, the hormonal cascade that happens when women give birth is something that that needs privacy. It really works best where, like if you think of like a barnyard cat, they go to the darkest, most private corner to give birth. They don't come out in the open and do this big show. It's not, that's just not instinctual. And so there is a cascade of hormones, mostly about 4 or 5 different hormones that are part of the birthing process. And once that cascade is flowing, it actually puts the mother into an altered state of consciousness, which is how labor best unfolds. Because if the mother stays in her thinking brain, in her neocortex, then she's going to be up in her head wondering, am I doing it right? Am I progressing? Is the baby okay? All of this thinking can inhibit the hormones that make the labor progress. So we call that altered state labor land. And it's like we weren't really designed to go through labor in our normal waking consciousness. So we kind of need to be able to go to this other dimension, which is where the experience of ecstatic birth can happen. And ecstatic just means ek is like outside of, right? And then stasis, your normal routine, your normal state of being. So ecstatic is just, another way of saying you're out of your mind in a way, and you go to another dimension you're bringing a new soul into this plane of existence. And that is deep, deep soulful work. It's no small work, and it requires the right kind of environment and the right kind of holding and support.
So you also created this program called Motherfly. Can you tell us why and how and what is it?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, so after the birth of my first daughter, Nahama, at that point I had been a midwife for 7 years. And I had sat at the feet of hundreds of mothers as they crossed this threshold, but I had never been there myself. And Nahama's birth it just completely dismantled my midwife brain and rebuilt me as an intuitive mammal. And it forced me to surrender at a level that I had never done before. It was very humbling. It was long. I got stuck at a certain point. I had to move past that. And then the postpartum journey was equally humbling. And I had done a lot of reading about parenting when I was pregnant with her and when she was young. And I had all these like very lofty ideals about what it was to be a good mother. And then motherhood really, really challenged me. And I realized that outside of preparing women for childbirth, there's a deeper preparation that needs to be taking place for what I call mother birth. Because when a baby is born, there's 2 births happening, and really 3, because the father is born as well. But there's, the birth of the baby and the birth of the mother. And that birth, that mother birth, is in many ways even more profound, even certainly longer lasting, right? We tend to prepare for the childbirth, and ultimately childbirth, even though it is important to prepare for, because it's an initiation, it's a rite of passage, and it's intense. But ultimately, it's a few hours or at most a few days of your life, and motherhood is forever. And so I began to get an inkling in my journey of motherhood after Nahama, my oldest, that that my work needed to deepen. Fast forward 9 years later, I had my 3rd daughter, Amaya. And so that was in 2016. And so even after 25 years of empowering mothers, I really hit my own breaking point after Amaya was born. And about 3 months in, I started to unravel. I was overwhelmed. I was anxious, burnt out, and irritable, snapping at my kids, resenting my partner, and questioning everything that I thought I knew as a mother and a midwife. And I think the worst part for me was feeling lost, because I had known since I was a little girl, I had very clear calling in life, and that was to be a midwife. And so I had always identified myself as a midwife, but it no longer felt sustainable anymore. I wasn't sleeping. I couldn't enjoy my children, and I lost my passion. And I felt like a failure on every level. As a mom, because I was irritable all the time. In my work, I began to feel like an imposter. And as a woman, because I couldn't seem to handle it. And the shame was suffocating. And the shame really shackled my healing. It was like the midwife who couldn't enjoy her own motherhood. I was too ashamed to reach out. And so I suffered, as so many mothers do, in silence and alone. Until one day I hit my rock bottom, you could say. I had taken my girls to the Children's Museum, and we were standing on a platform at the Miami Metro Rail station. I was exhausted because I wasn't sleeping and riddled with anxiety. And I looked down at the busy freeway below me, and I thought, I just want to jump. And my heart was racing. That thought terrified me. It shook me. And the only thing that stopped me were my daughters, because I couldn't let that be their story. And so in that moment, I made a vow to reclaim my mental health for them, for me, no matter what it took. And so I swallowed my pride. I borrowed money from my family, and I finally got the support that I desperately needed. And everything began to change. Within months, I wasn't just coping anymore. I was rising. My energy came back. I rewrote the scripts in all of my relationships, starting with my relationship with myself, really learning self-compassion at a whole new level. And I reconnected with my daughters in a way that I hadn't in years. And I left the toxic relationship that was draining me. And with that, I stepped into my next level purpose. I founded Motherfly, which is an organization dedicated to maternal wellness and empowerment. I launched the Mother Tongue podcast. I hosted global summits. I wrote ebooks. I became an international speaker. And I began helping mothers not just birth babies, but birth a more powerful version of themselves. So really helping moms not just to survive, but to thrive in their homes, in their work, in their businesses, and in their dreams. Because what I know for sure is that when mothers are well, their children thrive. And when mothers live their dreams, the world transforms. And that's why I'm here. That's my calling now. That's my passion, is to help mothers reclaim their wellness, their dreams, and their energy. Because if you're a mama and you're listening, your thriving is not a luxury. It is the foundation for everything.
Absolutely. I totally agree. And with that, I'm actually going to bring on Sabina, our co-host. Sabina, I think you also had, I don't know, underwater birthing, or you had a doula? I don't remember.
Well, first of all, wow, what a story, Corina. I actually had tears, I had goosebumps, a lot of stuff came up for me. So much from my own birth came up, and some other pieces that you shared. So I was planning to have this kind of most natural birth I can imagine. I lived in New York City at that time. I did a lot of research, and I definitely did not want to go into a hospital. So I hired a midwife, I hired a doula, I had a pool set up in my Manhattan apartment. I was planning to have a water birth. I did all the trainings before, the breath work, the prenatal massages, and I really was ready to have this kind of birth. But unfortunately, it came very different, nothing that I ever expected. So I was 30 hours in labor, and I got to the point, like as you mentioned, Corina, that I just went to a different state. I couldn't hear anything anymore. I mean, we had essential oils, we had soft music, had lots of plants in my apartment, so I felt very safe. And I got to this state where I couldn't hear anything, I couldn't see anything. I was actually somewhere else in this transcendent state. And all I remember, there were these waves hitting me, waves of intense pain I have never experienced before in my life. And I just kept breathing through those waves. And I was about 30 hours in labor already. And all of a sudden, I just remember my midwife panicking, said, "We gotta go to the hospital." That's all I heard. There was something about the heartbeat of the baby. The heartbeat either stopped or it slowed down. But anyway, I was naked. I had all kinds of liquids coming out of me. And all of a sudden, I was pushed down the stairs. They just put a rope on me. I was still barefoot out of my Manhattan apartment. And my midwife had a car, so I was pushing her car, and I ended up in the hospital. And all I remember, like I was pushed on a bed, and they put several syringes in my back. I was not asked anything. I was just pushed. I felt it was very aggressive. The lights were bright. I remember it was the full moon. I was looking up while I was pushed in the car. I looked up at the sky, and there was the full moon. But once I got to the hospital, I remember it was very intense, very unpleasant. And everyone, it was like this atmosphere of panic. And I remember getting these shots in my back, and then something was pushed on my face, and I smelled some chemicals. And that was the last thing I remembered. And then when I woke up, all of a sudden I woke up, I was in intense pain. My whole body was in pain. It was bright light, and some man was standing over me. I have never seen this man before. And he said, "I'm the Dr. So-and-so, and your baby is in intensive care unit, and it swallowed meconium they had to cut me open, so I ended up having a C-section. And the baby's in critical condition, and they're not sure. They have to perform surgery on the baby, and they're not sure if he's going to make it." So anyway, that was the most horrific news that I have ever received, and I couldn't even move. I was put, my partner at that time, he put me in a wheelchair, and I was wheeled down into the NICU. And I saw my son for the first time, but I couldn't hold him. He was in a glass case, and he was all tubes in his nose, in his mouth, in his belly button. It looked very scary. So that was kind of in a nutshell the experience I had. And he was 10 days in the NICU, and then after I had that surgery on him, after 4 days, I think I was told that he's going to live. And he's 18 now, and he's actually very healthy, which I'm very happy. But it was a very emotional moment in my life. As you can see, I'm having tears because that was not the experience that I lived healthy for so many years. I never take medication or shots ever. And I end up with the most toxic experience. I got 5 epidurals. And then I was in so much pain. They put me on morphine, and I was in the hospital for a few more days on intense. I was drugged out completely. It's the only way I could actually be without pain. And then after this, I was extremely ill. I just had depression, I think, for at least a year. I had severe depression. I still had pain in my back. So it took me a long time. I couldn't do yoga for, I think, 2 years because that cut in my belly hurt so much. Every time I stretched, I felt the pain. So just to recover from this experience, I think it took me 2 years. And what really helped getting back on the raw food lifestyle and doing some fasting, that expedited the process, and a lot of emotional healing, a lot of trauma release. But this was a very, very intense experience. And I often afterwards ask myself why, because I met so many women that share their birth experience. They have the most beautiful experience, and why I had to end up with this very intense experience. It took me 2 years until I finally, I let go of why did this happen to me. I guess this is the experience I called for, because I somehow attract always intense experience in my life. Looking back, there were so many. So maybe this is just part of my journey, that I face intense challenges and then to rise above these no matter what. I guess that was my so-called lesson in this, or let's say the teaching in this, to then really, take care of my body and get back into shape and start doing yoga every day and breathing and opening up this area. And actually just a year ago, I went to see a holistic practitioner in Florida. I drove all the way to Florida, and they do scar tissue removal, all manually. There's no invasion, all through the hands. Because I always felt this area where I had the C-section, this so tight. Even doing certain yoga positions like the wheel, I felt still the tightness even years after this. And I went down to Florida to have that treatment done, where he actually goes. I had it actually twice with his hands in that area and opens up the scar tissue, because he found actually out the scar tissue went all the way up to under my breasts, and it spread all in that area, not just where the scar was. It actually spread like a spider web all over my abdominal area. So I went twice to have this room like opened up and loosened up, so there's actually flow again in this area. So that was another piece that actually was part of this healing journey. So it was like basically a 17-year healing journey from that invasion.
And Sabina, was this non-surgical scar tissue removal, did it succeed? Did it really work?
Yes, and the first time he said he was able to loosen up about 60%. And then I went to have a second treatment, and he said, yeah, it's pretty much, there's very little left, but it will not come back.
So I've heard of this before. I don't remember, there's a name for it, but I can't remember it. Do you remember the name?
Yeah, the practitioner who did it is Dr. Sage Wolf.
And but the process that he does,
and it's called scar tissue remediation.
Yeah.
He calls it scar tissue, or I think he called it removal or I can't remember exactly the name, but it's all manual. It's basically they uses his elbows and his hand. It's a really, let's call it very deep body work, and it's painful like hell. It's like about 90 minutes where he dives deep with his elbow, with his hands, with his fingers, start loosen up that tissue, and opens it up so the energy can move again and starts to lose eliminate these tissues that have been forming, and they went all the way up to under my chest, and all the way in the whole abdominal area was full. He said it was very dense, the area. And that also explains why I had so many digestion issues my whole life, basically. And only now I've noticed it's gotten better. A lot had to do with the diet, of course, but that also helped because there was so much, it was all around the intestines. They were forming these spider webs and different pathways. So that took me like 2 sessions, painful sessions, 2 90-minute painful sessions to open it up again. And this is still the aftermath of what happened.
I know there are a lot of mothers with this scar tissue, and they think, oh, I can't put on a bikini anymore, and I can't do this. And it's really affected their own self-image. Corina, have you found other women to have gone through this? And go ahead and unmute yourself first, because I did mute you. So just let me know.
Yeah, for sure. I think that every woman has their own timeline for when they're even ready to look at their scar. And then, I usually encourage people to use to start massaging into the scar tissue, some vitamin E oil, also mixed with a little lavender, essential oil, because it helps with scarring. And I do find that the scar tissue remediation work is a useful tool. I don't do it myself, but I've referred people to others. Mm-hmm.
And do you know of anyone who's ever done it and did not get any results? I mean, does one have to be certified? If somebody is watching this today and wants to do it, can they just go to anybody who says scar tissue remediation or removal? Or is there something that they need to, questions they need to ask first, etc.? This question is for both you and Sabina.
Well, I would ask if have they worked with C-section scars specifically? That would be my question.
So this scar tissue is different for C-section than for any other kind of?
I guess I just feel like in general, when I send people to the chiropractor, I want them to go to a chiropractor who's versed in pregnancy care. It's just a sensitive time of our lives. And I mean, maybe all scar tissue acts the same way. That's not my area of expertise, so I can't really speak on that. But I just, if I'm going to send somebody to physical therapy, it's like I want, or pelvic floor physical therapy, I want to send them to somebody that works with postpartum women or with pregnant women.
So I'm going to go back to Sabina. Thank you for that, Corina. I'm going to go back to Sabina. Sabina, did you do any of the things that Corina is doing? I'd like Corina to also afterwards go more into detail to prepare women for birthing, like her Motherfly program. No, I do know you need to unmute yourself first. I do know you did a lot of stuff, an awful lot beforehand, but did you find this out yourself, or did you find this information easily at the time in New York City?
No, it was very difficult to find good information. I just, dived deep what I could find at that time, and I started going to prenatal yoga classes, talking to other mothers, and I attended one seminar. I can't remember. I think it was The Business of Being Birthing or something. There was a book that came out. A movie came out.
Movie. The Business of Being Born.
Yeah, Business of Being Born. I was pregnant in 2007, and I think that's when the movie came out. I went to this and I talked to some people. There was a Q&A afterwards. I talked to a lady and she recommended me different midwives. So I interviewed different midwives. And then I happened to know someone who knows a doula. So I kept just meeting people in that field and talking to people. And that's how it all came together. But there was not a lot of support out there, to be honest, because everyone who I knew pretty much they went the traditional route. Like all my friends went to the hospital who were pregnant. So I was actually the only one. And even my family, they started to question, what are you doing? This is not safe. You got to go to the hospital. So everyone kind of questioned. At the end, people told me, well, I told you so, you should go to the hospital there. This is dangerous what you're doing. And so I got a lot of negative comments from people because no one was doing what I was doing. And I really didn't have a lot of network, just a few people that I trusted. But this is definitely, there's a need for the alternative way, which is actually the true way, not alternative, because we are just programmed that the way you are pregnant, you go to the hospital. That's just the way it is. That's the way we do it. So I'm glad you're out there, Corina, doing what you're doing, because that work is so needed right now. Not just now, it's needed more than ever. So thank you for what you're doing.
Yes, I agree with you with that, Sabina, that the work that she's doing, that Corina is doing, is so critical right now. I'm going to go back to Corina. So, Corina, you can unmute yourself while Sabina mutes herself. Would like to ask you, Corina, and because I hear this question all the time, what's the difference between a doula and a midwife?
Yeah. So a doula it basically is there to provide education, to provide emotional and physical support either during birth or postpartum. Also is an advocate, particularly in the hospital setting, for their client, but they have no medical responsibility. A midwife is basically like a doctor, except better. But I'm a little biased. No, a midwife is just more, we cover all of the prenatal care. We're responsible for the delivery. We're responsible both for mom and baby, which is actually a little different than an obstetrician, because as long as the baby's inside the mother, the obstetrician has a responsibility to the baby. But once that baby is born, it's out of his care or her care and into the hands of the pediatrician. But for a community midwife, we're taking care of both mom and baby from pregnancy through postpartum. And so we do have medical responsibilities as well, in terms of, monitoring the pregnancy and monitoring the birth. So that's the main difference.
So do midwives have to be licensed or certified?
Yes, it depends on what state you live in, but for the most part, yes, you do need to be licensed. There are some states where it's illegal to be a midwife, and there are some states where it's illegal. I don't know how many of those states are left, but Tennessee actually used to be illegal, meaning that it wasn't illegal and it wasn't legal. Like, you didn't have to be certified. It wasn't regulated. Now it is regulated here. And so that's kind of state by state. The laws are different state by state.
And regulated by whom, please?
Either the Department of Health or the Board of Nursing. In Florida, where I practiced before, it was the Council of Licensed Midwifery, but that was also through the Department of Health. So it's usually through the Department of Health, I think.
Now, you've worked in Honduras, in Haiti, in Jamaica, in Africa. What's the difference there? Do they see birthing as being the most natural process or a medical intervention process, as is done usually here?
Depends on where you go. I mean, unfortunately, a lot of other countries adopt our erroneous ways of doing things. And so, like, when I first started going to Honduras, it was very much like a birth center at the hospital. It was because it was low risk. They didn't do C-sections there. So if anyone needed a C-section, they would be referred out. And women just labored, without much intervention. And then they got this big grant from the Japanese government. And the next time I went back, like a year later, they had built this whole new maternity ward. And now everyone was getting a Pitocin drip, and they were getting episiotomies, and there were C-sections happening there on site. And so it was sad to see that. But then I went, I spent 2 months in Uganda in the fall, and at a birth center that actually practices the midwifery model of care. And it's very much like how I do birth here. So it's very much looked at as a normal, natural process that most of the time doesn't need intervention, but we have skilled midwives here for those cases where, a baby needs to be resuscitated, or a mom needs to be sewn up, or we need to prevent or treat a hemorrhage. So, but I think, in developing countries, just out of, what's available to people, there's a lot more physiological birth because they don't necessarily have the resources to have these high-tech births like we do here, which I think is a good thing in a lot of ways. But it varies from place to place.
And when you start looking at both doulas, and when somebody start looking at both doulas and midwives, if the woman cannot decide between them, can she have both?
Oh, she can definitely. We play different roles. Like, you can't. I mean, if you wanted to birth out of the hospital, you need a midwife, unless you're going to do an unassisted birth, which is basically a birth where you have nobody medically trained to help you, which some women choose to do. But if there's a problem, then you're managing that on your own, and hopefully you're recognizing that there's a problem. So a doula can't replace a midwife, and a midwife can't replace a doula. I mean, a midwife can do a lot of what a doula does in terms of like the emotional and physical support in labor. But it is nice to have a team where you have a midwife and a doula, because we complement each other. And the more support the moms get, the better.
And do either you, the midwife, or a doula work with the father to be as well?
Absolutely, yeah. My clients tend to have fathers that are pretty hands-on, which is great. And one of the things I do in my care is community care. So once a month, I'll hold a group prenatal, and moms and dads are invited to come, and it's an opportunity for the pregnant people to be with others that are also choosing to birth out of the hospital, and share experiences, share things that are challenging to them, things that they're really loving about being pregnant. We explore different aspects of something that I learned about in my postpartum time after my third daughter through the depression. One of the things that helped me was that I learned about this concept, this word matrescence. And matrescence is a word that was coined by an anthropologist, Donna Raphael, back in the 1970s, that refers to the transformation of identity that takes place when we become mothers. So it involves physical changes, hormonal changes, brain changes. Actually, the very first sign that you're pregnant is in the brain. So you could do an MRI on a pregnant woman and see that she was pregnant before she could pee on a stick and know that she was pregnant. That's how early the brain changes start. So there's brain changes, there's social changes, right? Your role in society is changing. And that's a huge thing that we unpack in my Motherfly program, because until you can see the water that you're swimming in, it will control you, and oftentimes in negative ways. And so we explore the social changes. There's spiritual changes, your relationship. Maybe you didn't have a relationship with God before, or the divine, or however source, however you want to name it. And then you get pregnant and you feel this life forming inside you, and this life growing, and this life moving. And it's like this, I don't know, I just felt this like energetic, like zzz, like there was something there that was very new. And so there's all these aspects. And so matrescence, if you think of another way to kind of help folks get the concept, is if you think of the word adolescence, right? Adolescence, we know you're going to have brain changes, you're having social changes, you're having hormonal changes, your body's changing form. And so adolescence describes that transformation of identity from childhood to adulthood. And matrescence, or putrescence for men, is that shift from not being a mother to being a mother, or from being a mother of two to now being a mother of three. Every time you give birth, you enter into a new cycle of matrescence. And I think understanding that it's this really deep and profound experience can help people to navigate the different emotions that they have along the way, the different experiences that they're having. There's a grief process that's part of becoming a parent that doesn't get talked about, because it's considered taboo, because we're supposed to just be happy and joyful. And the reality is that there's a huge loss of personal freedom when you become a parent, and there's a grief process that goes along with that. And that's normal. And I think, part of the epidemic of like postpartum depression and anxiety is that grief process is not allowed to be expressed. It's not conceived of in that way. It's just becomes this dark cloud. Whereas if we can name it and we can talk about it and we can say, well, oh, this makes so much sense because, I can no longer do this, and this. Of course, there's some sadness that goes along with that. And that's okay. And that doesn't mean that you're a bad mom. There's so much social programming that we receive starting from when we're children. It doesn't start when we become pregnant. It's something that's very well ingrained in us. This idea of what I didn't know at the time with my first, but I understand now, is this perfect mother myth. I've also referred to it as like the supermom archetype, but it's this like superhuman standard that mothers are held to, where, for example, and it really can show up in different ways, or it's has different elements depending on your culture, your country of origin, even your family, your socioeconomic status, race, ethnicity. All those things can impact what your version of the perfect mother myth is. But essentially, it's things like expecting for us to have infinite patience, even when functioning on just a couple hours of sleep. We're expected to be the default parents when it comes to, setting up a doctor's appointments, registering the kids for school or for camp, or taking them to extracurricular activities. We're supposed to make every meal from scratch with all organic ingredients and never let our kid have a screen. And not that those things are bad. Of course, it would be great if we could give them every meal from scratch and all organic ingredients. But the reality is that we are working moms, and we are moms in pursuing higher education. We are moms that run businesses. And this job was never, ever, ever designed to be done by one or even two people. It truly does take a village, not just to raise children, but to raise mothers. And so Motherfly is the name of my business, but it's also the name of what I conceive of as a new maternal archetype that is a sharp pivot from the supermom and the martyr, which are really patriarchal constructs that are very limiting and very damaging to us. And so the Motherfly has learned to include herself in her circle of care, and she's living inside of a matrix of relational support. So she's not afraid to ask for help. She understands that her wellness is her birthright, that she doesn't have to, her wellness is not a reward for being a good mom, or for doing all the things. And the other thing about the perfect mother myth is that we're supposed to enjoy every minute of motherhood, and that's just not the reality. There's hard days, there's things that your kids do that are going to irritate you and annoy you, and that doesn't make you a bad mom, it just makes you human. And so, but because we've had this programming, when those things come up, when we are human, we feel a lot of guilt and shame. And I think that contributes to these large numbers when it comes to perinatal mood disorders, which are actually the number one complication of pregnancy. And we see this epidemic of, mom guilt, mom shame, mom burnout. We really are in, mothers in this country, and I think globally, because I've been traveling, are in crisis. And mostly at the bottom line, really underneath everything, at the source, I believe, is patriarchy. And the programming that we get from a very young age, that our worthiness, that our value comes from either our physical beauty or our ability to give care or be of service. And that's erroneous. And but unfortunately, it affects us deeply in a multitude of ways.
So I'm going to bring in Sabina here. Sabina, having listened to what Corina, I thought very eruditely expressed. Did you find that you found a difference in your brain when you got pregnant? And did you know about matrescence before raising mothers?
Well, first of all, I totally relate to what you just mentioned, Corina. Like like the years after giving birth, I felt so much shame, so much guilt, so much loss of freedom, because I was a very independent person living in New York City, going to all the events, all the parties. I was in the fashion and film industry. And all of a sudden, I was home with a newborn who would never sleep, who would keep me up all night, and was very demanding. And I couldn't do the things that I once enjoyed doing. So for a long time, I actually blamed my son that I can no longer, and I was planning to become rich and famous in the film industry, go to Hollywood. That was my dream. And all of a sudden, I was home with a newborn, changing diapers, breastfeeding, and doing all the things. And I got to the point where I really hated my life. Like, I had serious depression, and I started to go to different groups of other women, like it was a mommy baby group. And most of them were so happy. They said, I love being a mom. They enjoy the time. And I was the only one actually felt I'm not loving this. I don't know why they find it so exciting. And the other thing, I was also going through a difficult relationship with my son's father, and we just didn't go along, and the relationship was very dysfunctional. So that added also on top of this, to the point I really questioned my life. I thought, life, it's over. That's just how I'm just going to be taking care of a child. I'm not going to have a career. And I seriously doubted myself. And yes, a lot of shame and guilt and making myself wrong. Why did I even have a child? I should have just had an abortion. I actually had that thought, and I'm feeling guilty for having the thought of thinking about the abortion, what I should have done. So there was a lot of like inner turmoil, and I would say a lot of trauma. So I guess it took me about, I would say, until my son turned maybe on 5, 6, that I suddenly found the love in this relationship. When we started having conversations, and he would always smile. He was always a very happy child, never been sick or never causing any troubles. It was this happy child who would just love me. And then I got to the point where I realized, this is actually the love I was looking for all these years, not having this love from this child who would just love me unconditionally. And then finally I found the love. And that was really the shift that happened. And those 5 years, I couldn't even do anything in my life. I couldn't be a filmmaker anymore. I couldn't be an actress. That was my dream before. And all of a sudden I questioned, do I even want to be a filmmaker? Do I want to be an actress? Do I really want to go to Hollywood? And then suddenly this wasn't attractive anymore. There was suddenly this shift that I just wanted to be in nature. I just want to live a really natural life, and I can no longer live in New York City. And my son was actually the one who got me to this place. I realized I have to live somewhere else. So I moved from Manhattan to Brooklyn, and I would go to the park every day with my son, and I loved being in the park. And then came the point that the park was not even nature enough. And that was the catalyst, then moving fully into the forest and moving upstate. But my son was actually I would call him, he saved me from going down the path of, looking for fame and fortune and being out there in this world and looking for the shiny objects and all the things I was really focused on at that time. And when I had the turning point, suddenly I want to be in nature. I want to eat the best quality food. I want to have fresh, clean water. I want to have fresh air. That was suddenly like the driving force in my life. So my son was the catalyst to brought me then also on the path to really health, which was always my passion since I'm 19. But I never considered making this as a profession, making this as a calling. So that was the stepping. So for my son, I went to the nature, and then I suddenly realized I'm here to serve people. I'm here to serve people and guiding them to the path of having the best vitality, best health, highest state of energy, most happiness, best well-being. So ultimately, it was a very, extremely positive, but I had to go through this probably 5 years of the dark night of the soul, questioning everything.
So I am so thrilled to be having this conversation. I told you I could do this forever, constantly, that I'd love to invite Corina back and Sabina to actually even speak to each other and just go back and forth. Corina, I have one last question for you. Do you believe or think, or have you discovered in your own self? You had said before that this is what you're meant to do, and then all of a sudden you started, having all these problems. But do you think that the path that you have chosen is a path that gives you the honor and the reverence that is given to medical doctors?
As a midwife, you mean?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. No, it's not given to midwives. I mean, by some people, the women that I serve, they certainly think more highly of midwives than doctors. But our culture, our society, our medical system does not. So that's part of when I before I became a midwife, I went to this conference, a midwifery conference in California, and somebody that was speaking said, midwifery is 10% delivering babies and 90% politics. And I was just like, whoa, that's crazy. But it's true. It is very political because unfortunately you're dealing with the medical industrial complex, which is about power and money, and doctors are inside of that and midwives are kind of outside of that.
Yeah.
So Pete, one of our co-hosts, just came on, and just in time to say goodbye. But 1 minute, Pete. I don't know if you were able to listen to Corina and Sabina, but you have exactly 1 minute to just give us your own. I know you had, I think, 7 children. You've your father to 6 or 7. I don't remember. But could you just, in 1 minute, just sum up your own idea of midwifery and giving birth naturally?
Oh, wow. Yeah. Apologies. I just came on. We've had a problem with the power pack and etc. So we're on our phone. My 1 minute. So for me, it's been amazing from experiencing the most difficult births and then coming only through the last 10 years of more natural births. It's been epic, the difference, and then recognizing where there have been problems and why the problems arose. It's just been, honestly, such an epiphany. So for me, it's been such a beautiful experience to able to experience in this lifetime. Honestly, I can see people go through life and never experience certain experiences. So, it's been such a eye-opener, such a inspiration and heartfelt experiences for me. And yes, last time we did, or first time should I say, 3 years ago, we did a home birth, what they call as a wild birth, lotus birth, skin to skin for 10 days. So all that was such an experience for me, and I've done lots of breath work, etc. So we're going live, I presume. Is that my minute?
Yes, that was it. Thank you so much, Corina. Just in half a minute, can you tell us about your retreats, please, and how the people contact you? Just unmute yourself. It will be less than half a minute. Okay. Less than half a minute.
Okay. This June 18th through the 22nd, we are hosting the Chrysalis Retreat, which is a retreat for pregnant women and couples to come and be deeply held and to really prepare for the experience of matrescence, to really prepare for parenting in this new paradigm.
Okay, we've got to go, unfortunately. Thank you so much for that, everyone. We will have this conversation